The billionaire stood frozen in his corner office, 73 floors above the city, staring at a handwritten note that had just shattered everything he believed about success. It was from the janitor, and it contained a truth that would cost him his empire or save his soul. Stay with me, because what happened next didn't unfold in boardrooms or on earnings calls. It happened in the silent moments between midnight and dawn, when a man who had everything discovered he had nothing at all. The janitor's name was never spoken in the executive corridors. He was a shadow that moved through the building after hours, invisible to those who ruled the daylight. But on this particular Tuesday evening, as the billionaire worked late into the night, something extraordinary unfolded. The CEO had stayed behind, drowning in quarterly reports and acquisition strategies, when he heard the gentle sound of a vacuum cleaner humming down the hallway. He barely noticed at first. The sounds of cleaning had become white noise in his relentless pursuit of more, always more. But then came the singing. Soft, almost imperceptible, a melody that drifted through the crack beneath his mahogany door. It was a song about gratitude, about finding joy in the smallest moments. The billionaire, whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose signature closed deals worth billions, found himself drawn to that voice. He opened the door and saw him, an elderly man with silver hair and weathered hands, pushing his cart with a smile that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep and untouchable by circumstance. Their eyes met, and in that instant something shifted in the universe of the 73rd floor. The CEO, driven by an impulse he couldn't name, asked a question he had never asked anyone in his building before. He asked the man how he was doing, not as a formality, not as a pleasantry to be forgotten before the words even faded, but as a genuine inquiry into another human being's existence. The janitor stopped, surprised, then smiled wider. He said he was blessed. Blessed to have work, blessed to have health, blessed to see another sunrise. The billionaire felt something crack inside his chest. Here was a man who earned in a year what the CEO spent on a single watch, and yet he spoke of blessings. The conversation that followed lasted only 15 minutes, but it planted a seed that would grow into a forest of transformation. The janitor shared, without bitterness or envy, how he had once been a teacher, how life had dealt him cards that forced him to start over at an age when most people retire. He spoke of his daughter, how he was helping her through medical school, how every floor he mopped brought her one step closer to healing others. As the weeks passed, these encounters became a ritual. The billionaire began staying late, not for work, but for those conversations. He learned that the janitor woke at 4 in the morning to care for his ailing wife before coming to work. He learned that the man had never missed a single day in 12 years, not because he feared losing his job, but because he believed in honoring commitments. He learned that true wealth had nothing to do with the numbers in a bank account, and everything to do with the richness of purpose and connection. One evening, the janitor brought the billionaire a thermos of coffee. Not expensive coffee, not the kind served in the executive lounge, but coffee made at home, offered with the generosity of someone who understood that sharing what little you have is the greatest abundance of all. The CEO, who had sipped rare wines in the company of presidents and celebrities, found that simple coffee to be the most meaningful beverage he had ever tasted. It came with no agenda, no ask, no hidden motive. It came from pure human kindness. Then came the note. The handwritten note that started this entire revelation. The janitor had left it on the CEO's desk one Friday night, tucked beneath a small potted plant. The note said simply this: "Sir, I've watched you for 12 years through these windows and walls. You've built an empire, but I wonder, have you built a life? The greatest lesson my father taught me was that we don't remember days, we remember moments. And the moments that matter most are the ones we spend making others feel seen. You've made me feel seen these past weeks, thank you. But I worry you've spent so long looking at spreadsheets that you've forgotten to look at souls, including your own." The billionaire read those words over and over until they blurred through tears he didn't know he still had the capacity to shed. How had this happened? How had he become so disconnected from the very essence of what makes us human? He thought back to his childhood, to the young man who had started with nothing but dreams and determination. Somewhere along the climb to the top, he had lost himself. He had traded presence for productivity, connection for conquest, meaning for metrics. That weekend, the CEO did something he hadn't done in 23 years. He didn't work. Instead, he sat in silence and allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had become. He thought about his 3 children, all adults now whom he barely knew. He thought about his ex-wife, who had left him not because she stopped loving him, but because she realized she was living with a ghost. He thought about the hundreds of employees whose names he didn't know, whose stories remained mysteries, whose humanity he had reduced to productivity scores and performance reviews. Monday morning arrived like a reckoning. The billionaire walked into his building with a decision crystallizing in his mind. He would learn, not from business schools or management consultants or leadership gurus. He would learn from the man who cleaned his floors, who had somehow mastered the art of living, while he had only mastered the art of earning. This janitor, this invisible soul who moved through the building like a whisper, had somehow cracked the code that all his education and success had never revealed, and the CEO was ready, finally ready, to become a student again. What happened next would transform not just one man, but an entire company, and ripple outward in ways that would touch thousands of lives. Because true transformation never happens in isolation. It spreads like light breaking through darkness, illuminating everything it touches. The first lesson arrived on a Tuesday morning, unexpected and humbling. The billionaire had arranged to spend a day shadowing the janitor, wanting to understand the world from his perspective. His executive team thought he had lost his mind. The board members whispered concerns about his mental state. But he didn't care anymore about their opinions. He cared about something deeper, something that had been calling to him from beneath the noise of his constructed life. They started at 4:30 in the morning. The CEO arrived at the janitor's modest apartment in a neighborhood he had never visited, despite it being only 20 minutes from his penthouse. The contrast was staggering. Where his home boasted marble and gold fixtures, this place had warmth. Photographs covered every wall, telling stories of graduations and birthdays and ordinary moments elevated to treasures through love and attention. The janitor's wife, frail but radiant, greeted him with a smile that held no judgment, only curiosity about this stranger entering their morning ritual. He watched as the janitor prepared breakfast for his wife, cutting her food into small pieces, helping her with medication, speaking to her with a tenderness that made the billionaire's heart ache with recognition of everything he had lost. This was devotion. This was love in its purest form, stripped of romance and reduced to its essential core, showing up day after day for another human being. The janitor explained that his wife had suffered a stroke 3 years ago. The medical bills had been catastrophic, but he spoke of it not as a burden, but as an honor to care for the woman who had stood by him through every season of life. The first lesson crystallized in that moment. Presence is the greatest gift we can offer another human being. Not presents, not provisions, not promises of future attention, but actual presence, the full weight of our awareness and care focused completely on someone else. The billionaire realized he had been absent from his own life for decades, physically present, but emotionally elsewhere, always thinking about the next deal, the next conquest, the next achievement. He had given his family everything except himself. They drove to the office building together as dawn broke over the city. The janitor drove an old truck that coughed and sputtered, but ran faithfully. He had named it Hope, he explained, because it kept going against all odds. The billionaire, who owned 7 luxury cars he barely drove, found himself envying this simple relationship between man and machine, built on gratitude rather than status. The second lesson emerged as they began the morning cleaning routine. The janitor moved through each office with genuine care, straightening papers that had been left askew, watering plants that belonged to people who would never know he had tended them, leaving small unsigned notes of encouragement on desks where he sensed someone was struggling. He explained that he read the offices like stories. The executive who kept a bottle of antacids in every drawer was clearly stressed. The young analyst whose family photos faced her while she worked was homesick. The manager whose trash can was always filled with discarded sketches was an artist trapped in the wrong career. The billionaire was stunned. This man knew his employees better than he did, and he did it not through algorithms or performance metrics, but through attention and empathy. The second lesson became clear. True leadership is about seeing people, really seeing them, not as functions or resources, but as complete human beings with dreams and struggles and infinite complexity. The janitor led through service and observation. The CEO had been managing through detachment and abstraction. As they cleaned the executive floor, the janitor shared the third lesson. Though he didn't frame it as teaching, he simply lived it. He spoke about how every job, no matter how humble, becomes meaningful when we understand it as service to others. He wasn't just cleaning floors, he was creating environments where people could think clearly and work safely. He wasn't just emptying trash cans, he was removing obstacles to productivity and health. He had transformed his work from menial labor into purposeful contribution. By changing the story he told himself about what he was doing, the billionaire felt the weight of this wisdom settle into his bones. He had built a company, yes, but had he built it as service or as conquest? Had he created value for others or merely extracted it for himself? The questions haunted him as they moved through the building, the janitor's quiet dignity illuminating everything the CEO had gotten wrong about success and significance. During their lunch break, eaten not in the executive dining room, but on a bench in the building's courtyard, the fourth lesson revealed itself. The janitor pulled out a worn notebook and showed the billionaire something extraordinary. For 12 years he had been writing down one good thing about each day, not major events or milestones, but tiny moments of grace, a stranger's smile, sunlight through a window, a bird singing in the morning, the way soap bubbles caught the light, his daughter's voice on the phone. Each entry was dated, a testament to a practice of deliberate gratitude that had accumulated into a treasure of awareness. The lesson was profound in its simplicity. Gratitude is not a feeling, but a discipline, a daily practice of training our minds to notice beauty and goodness, even in difficult circumstances. The janitor had faced poverty, illness, setback after setback, and yet his life was rich with appreciation. The billionaire had experienced success beyond measure and felt empty. The difference wasn't in their circumstances, but in their practices, in where they had trained their attention to rest. Sharing these stories isn't easy, but if you feel the weight of these hidden truths, subscribe and join us. Your like can spread empathy, and your comment might share a story that touches another soul, because we're all searching for the same things, aren't we? Connection, meaning, purpose beyond the superficial measures of success we've been taught to chase. The afternoon brought them to the fifth and most challenging lesson. They were cleaning a conference room where a meeting had just ended, and the janitor paused at the whiteboard. Written there in aggressive strokes were phrases about crushing the competition, dominating the market, destroying rivals. The janitor turned to the billionaire with sadness in his eyes and spoke truth that cut to the core. He said that a life built on defeating others will always feel empty because it's constructed on a foundation of separation rather than connection. True fulfillment comes not from being better than others, but from helping others become better. The CEO stood there, confronting decades of competitive mindset, of zero-sum thinking, of believing that his success required someone else's failure. The janitor, who had competed with no one, who had compared himself to no one, who had measured his life by completely different metrics, was somehow more successful in the ways that actually mattered. He was happy. He was at peace. He was connected to purpose and people. He had won at the game that actually counts. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. It unfolds slowly like a flower opening to sunlight, each petal revealing itself in its own time. The billionaire returned to his office that evening, but he was no longer the same man who had left it that morning. Something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of his soul. He sat in his leather chair, surrounded by awards and accolades and framed magazine covers, and saw them all for what they were: monuments to an empty victory, trophies in a game that didn't matter. He began implementing changes immediately, starting with himself. Each morning, before checking his phone or reading reports, he wrote in a gratitude journal, mimicking the practice the janitor had shown him. At first, the entries felt forced, performative, the writings of a man trying to buy enlightenment the way he had bought everything else. But gradually, something shifted. He began noticing things he had overlooked for years. the way morning light painted his office gold, the loyalty of his assistant who had stayed with him through impossible demands, the ingenious solution a junior employee had proposed in a meeting. His awareness was expanding, slowly reclaiming territory that had been surrendered to ambition and distraction. He started walking the floors of his company, not for inspection or surveillance, but for connection. He learned names. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He discovered that the receptionist was a published poet, that the IT specialist was caring for elderly parents, that the marketing director had survived cancer and now saw every day as a gift. These weren't just employees anymore. They were human beings with entire universes contained within them, and he had been blind to their existence. The janitor became his unofficial mentor, though neither of them used that word. They met regularly, sometimes in the CEO's office, sometimes over coffee in a diner. The janitor loved a place where the billionaire learned to appreciate a $3 breakfast, prepared with more care than the $100 meals he was accustomed to. These conversations ranged across everything: family, regret, hope, purpose, mortality. The janitor spoke of his childhood in poverty, how his parents had taught him that wealth meant having enough to share. He spoke of mistakes he'd made, relationships he'd damaged, years he'd wasted chasing the wrong things before finding his way back to what mattered. The billionaire shared his own story, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, speaking without the armor of success to protect him. He talked about his father, a demanding man who had equated love with achievement, who had praised only results and never effort or character. He talked about building his company not from passion, but from a desperate need to prove his worth, to finally earn an approval that would never come because his father had died years ago, taking that possibility with him into the grave. He talked about his children, strangers now, and the unbearable grief of knowing he had repeated his father's mistakes, had measured his love in tuition payments and trust funds, rather than time and presence. The janitor listened without judgment, his weathered face a map of compassion. He didn't offer easy platitudes or quick fixes. He simply bore witness, and in that witnessing created space for healing. He reminded the billionaire that awareness is the first step toward change, that recognizing our mistakes is how we stop making them, that it's never too late to become who we were meant to be. These words landed like seeds in fertile ground. The CEO reached out to his children. The conversations were awkward at first, stilted and strange after years of distance. His oldest daughter was skeptical, having been disappointed too many times before. His son was angry, resentment spilling out in accusations that hurt precisely because they were true. His youngest was simply confused, unsure who this man was who suddenly wanted to know about her life, her dreams, her struggles. But the billionaire persisted, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with consistent presence. Weekly calls that he never missed. Questions about their lives that he genuinely wanted answered. Slow, patient reconstruction of bridges he had burned through neglect. Within the company, the changes rippled outward. The billionaire restructured his leadership team, promoting not just for results, but for character, for how people treated those beneath them on the organizational chart, for capacity for empathy and service. He instituted new policies, generous parental leave, mental health support, flexible work arrangements that honored the reality that employees had lives beyond their jobs. Some shareholders complained that he was going soft, that these changes would hurt the bottom line. But something remarkable happened instead. Productivity increased, retention improved, innovation flourished. People who felt seen and valued gave more, not less, because humans are wired for reciprocity and meaning. He established a new tradition. Once a month he would spend a full day working alongside an employee at any level of the company, learning their job, understanding their challenges, seeing the business through their eyes. He worked in the mailroom, in customer service, in the warehouse, in the cafeteria. Each experience humbled him and educated him in ways his executive briefings never had. He learned about the equipment that kept breaking down, the software that made simple tasks complicated, the policies that sounded good in boardrooms but created chaos in practice. And he fixed these things not to boost metrics, but because he had looked into the eyes of the people affected and could no longer accept their struggles as acceptable collateral damage. The janitor watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. He had never sought to transform the billionaire. He had simply lived his truth and allowed it to be witnessed. But he saw now that authenticity is contagious, that one person living with integrity gives others permission to do the same. Their friendship deepened into something rare and precious, a connection that transcended class and age and circumstance, built on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. If you're still with me, if these lessons are resonating in the chambers of your own heart, subscribe to this journey. Like this video if transformation is possible, if second chances exist, if we can all learn from those we've overlooked. Comment below and share who taught you lessons that changed everything, because wisdom doesn't always come from the powerful or famous. Sometimes it comes from the people we pass by without seeing, the souls whose light we miss because we're looking in all the wrong directions. One evening, as they sat together in the now quiet building, the janitor shared something he had never told anyone. He revealed that he had once been offered a promotion, a position that would have moved him into management, away from the cleaning work. He had turned it down, not because he lacked ambition, but because he had found his calling. He loved the solitude of his work, the meditation of repetitive motion, the opportunity to observe and serve without the complications of office politics. He had chosen his path deliberately, measuring success not by salary or status, but by peace and purpose. The billionaire understood then that the janitor wasn't someone who had settled or failed. He was someone who had won completely, who had figured out what mattered and built his life accordingly. The final chapter of this story unfolded 2 years after that first conversation in the hallway, after that first moment when two souls recognized each other across the artificial divide of status and circumstance. The billionaire had transformed not just himself, but the entire culture of his organization. The company had become known not just for its profits, but for its principles, not just for its market share, but for its humanity. Business schools studied it as a case example of conscious capitalism. Employees stayed for decades, loyal not to a paycheck, but to a mission that honored their dignity. And at the center of it all stood a man who had learned that true wealth is measured in relationships, in impact, in the difference we make in the lives of others. But life, as it always does, brought a test. The janitor became ill. The years of early mornings and physical labor, the stress of caregiving and financial struggle, had taken their toll on his body. Cancer, the doctors said, aggressive and advanced. The prognosis was grim. When the billionaire heard the news, he felt a fear unlike anything he had experienced in business, a terror that came from the prospect of losing someone who had become essential to his existence, a North Star guiding him toward his better self. He arranged for the best medical care, the finest specialists, treatment at facilities where miracles happened regularly. But the janitor, true to his character, was reluctant to accept. He worried about the cost, about being a burden, about receiving what he hadn't earned. The CEO had to convince him that this wasn't charity, but love, that the janitor had given him gifts beyond price. And this was simply a way of saying thank you, of honoring a friendship that had saved his life, even as the janitor's was now threatened. Through the months of treatment, the billionaire was there. He drove the janitor to appointments. He sat with him through chemotherapy sessions, watching poison fight poison, hoping the cure wouldn't arrive too late. He helped care for the janitor's wife, learning to cook simple meals, to change bedding, to offer comfort through presence when words failed. He organized the company to support their colleague, and the response was overwhelming. Employees who had been touched by the janitor's quiet kindness contributed to a fund. They sent cards and flowers. They visited and shared stories about small things he had done that had brightened their days, moments he probably didn't even remember, but that had mattered enormously to those who received them. The janitor's daughter, now a resident at a prestigious hospital, flew home to be with her father. She met the billionaire and understood immediately what had happened between these two unlikely friends. She thanked him for seeing her father, for recognizing the extraordinary person hidden inside ordinary circumstances. She shared that her father had always told her that the measure of a person was not what they achieved, but how they treated people who could do nothing for them. The CEO felt those words pierce his heart, remembering who he had been just 2 years earlier, someone who would have walked past her father 1,000 times without truly seeing him. During one of their conversations in the hospital room, with machines beeping and monitors glowing, the janitor shared his final lesson. He said that death is the great teacher if we let it be, that knowing our time is limited should inform how we spend our days, who we love, what we prioritize. He wasn't afraid of dying, he explained, because he had lived fully, had loved deeply, had served faithfully. He had no regrets about the empire he never built, or the fame he never achieved. His legacy was in the lives he had touched, in the daughter he had raised to heal others, in the CEO he had helped transform, in the countless small kindnesses that had rippled outward in ways he would never fully know. The billionaire wept openly, no longer ashamed of tears, no longer performing strength he didn't feel. He told the janitor that he loved him, that their friendship had been the greatest gift of his life, that he was a better man because of the wisdom and grace he had witnessed. The janitor smiled, his face thin now but still luminous with that inner light that had first caught the CEO's attention. He said that we teach what we most need to learn, that in helping the billionaire find his way, he had deepened his own understanding of what mattered. They had saved each other, he said, which is how the best relationships work, each person calling forth the highest potential in the other. Against the odds, the janitor survived. The cancer went into remission. The doctors called it remarkable, but the billionaire called it something else. Grace, mercy, a second chance that both men had earned through the courage to change, to grow, to become more than they had been. The janitor returned to work eventually, though with reduced hours and modified duties. The company had created a new position for him, Director of Workplace Culture and Human Connection. His job was simply to do what he had always done, to notice people, to encourage them, to remind everyone through his presence that we are all connected, that every role matters, that service is the highest calling. The billionaire continued his own journey of transformation, knowing it would last his lifetime, that becoming fully human is work that never finishes. He reconciled with his children, building relationships that were real and reciprocal rather than transactional. He remarried, choosing a partner who valued character over status, who loved the man he was becoming rather than the image he had projected. He restructured his wealth, creating foundations that addressed the root causes of suffering rather than just treating symptoms. He became an advocate for workers' rights, for living wages, for policies that honored the dignity of every person, regardless of their position or profession. Years later, at a company gathering celebrating 2 decades of transformation, the billionaire stood before his employees and told this story. He shared how a janitor had taught him everything business school had left out, how the 5 lessons he had learned had reconstructed his understanding of success and significance. Presence over productivity, seeing people completely, work as service, gratitude as practice, connection over competition. These weren't just corporate values printed on posters, they were living principles that shaped every decision, every interaction, every moment. This was the journey of one soul awakening through another, but countless stories like it wait to be told. If you felt the ache of disconnection or the joy of being truly seen, join our community. Subscribe to hear more stories that celebrate our shared humanity. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about someone who taught you what really matters. Together, we honor the teachers who appear in unexpected forms, the lessons that arrive when we're finally ready to receive them, and the truth that transformation is always possible when we choose love over fear, connection over isolation, service over self. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Until next time, may you see and be seen, may you teach and be taught. May you remember that we are all both students and teachers in this beautiful, heartbreaking, magnificent dance called life.